Hey, welcome back to the Business of Healthcare podcast. I hope you guys are doing well. In this episode, I have the pleasure of sitting down and speaking with my good friend, Ben Gowland. We talk about the recently published GP contract letter and some of the things that stood out for him. We talked about just leading in uncertainty, how to build relationships, especially with our ICB colleagues who are being stretched thin, and also there is some job insecurity there. Ben also shares the importance of primary care leaders positioning themselves to convene neighbourhood conversations. We also talk about how much room and scope there is for local negotiation. Ben gives us some really practical top tips on reaching out to members of our neighbourhood to try to get that meeting and to start that relationship building. And we also talked about, we just touched upon it at the end, and I know I'm guilty of this. At what point do we move from commentary on the information that is not there to actually doing something, to the action part? So this conversation, regardless of where you are in the system, you will form, if you work in health and care, you will form part of a neighbourhood. So there's definitely lots of nuggets for you guys to take away. Enjoy. Hey Ben, thank you for joining me on the Business of Healthcare podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to see you again, Sarah.
Yeah, likewise. Hey, you've not been on the podcast for absolutely ages, which I was quite surprised at. So could you introduce yourself to our audience for those that may not know you?
Okay, yeah. So my name's Ben Gowland. I'm currently director of Ockham Healthcare. I've been running that now for 10 years. But before that, I was a CCG chief exec, and then before that, I was a chief executive of GP Federation of 70 practices in Northamptonshire. My background before that was all hospital management. I did some sort of national change program. So I was in the NHS for 20 years before I started Ockham.
What do you think people would be surprised to know about you?
I don't know. It's like you were just saying to me like you don't think people kind of know me that well, which
No,
is interesting, right? Because I write quite a lot of stuff. But
you don't talk about yourself.
yeah, no. Well, I guess one thing is I do play a lot of tennis, so I currently have a ranking of about in the age category of 150 in the world.
I knew you were going to say
Did you? I all I can talk about is tennis, right? So
I thought he's not just going to go, oh, I really like playing tennis. I knew that you'd drop in your ranking.
you got to be proud of something, right?
Absolutely. And do you think, actually, as a leader, we always talk about like the know, like, and trust factor. Do you think it is important for leaders to be open about their like a little bit about their personal life? Because I would say I'm on that spectrum. I'm quite open. I have regretted it in the past, definitely. Or is it better to be, like a little bit more, like not closed, but just, like work is work and home is home?
Do you know what I think? I don't think there's a right answer to that. I think people are different. And so some people are naturally, like yourself, are very friendly and build relationships. And if that's how you are, then I think thinking I'm going to have a work persona where I behave differently to how I actually am won't work. Because I think what people sort of look for and respond to is sort of that genuineness. And so, for me, it always worked in a system to have a set of relationships, and they weren't just the relationships that are, I guess, focused on, if you make a promise, do you deliver on what you say and those kind of things. But equally, do you get to know people as people, and do you care about the fact that they've got a life outside work, and when there's stuff going on for people outside of work, that actually matters and does impact on what they're doing. And I think having those personal relationships is the key to working, I think, in organisations, but definitely working between organisations as well.
Okay, and I think that people won't know this, and I have said this to you, and I don't think you believe it, but I feel like I was like your apprentice.
I don't believe it, but yeah, anyway, carry on.
You were. So mine and Ben's relationship probably goes back, because if you've had your business for 10 years, I'm
Yeah,
coming up to 11 in March.
yeah.
So we started roughly around the same time. Ben had his podcast at the time I think it was called the Ockham Health Podcast. And I used to listen to that. I was like a fan. And then one day I plucked up the courage to send you an email to say, oh, I really like your podcast, and you were like, oh, thanks. Oh, do you want to go for a drink? Are you in London? And I was like, he was like, you're going to be in London this day? And I was like, oh, yeah, 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 I am. I clearly wasn't. So I went all the way,
Oh, did you?
went
Yeah.
all the way to London. We met for a coffee, and then we kind of just loosely stayed in touch. And then I think one day he reached out to me and was like, what do you do? And I was like, oh, like project management in healthcare. And you introduced me to Healthbridge.
That's right. Yeah. So I was
And
working
then,
there at a consultancy role there for a while. That's right. And I remember you came in and you did a number of roles there, Tara, and
yeah,
you did a great job. It's not an easy environment to work in, and I thought you did fantastic.
no, there was one point where, and I think when I first started my business, I was very much, and I'd worked in private sector and I'd worked in higher education, and every sector has its, like their way of working. And I came in very like, this is my job and I'm going to do it. Like, and you are going to help me do that because that's your job. And it was very, like black and white. And I think as time went on, I think you were like, no, no.
Life's more fluid, though, isn't it? And especially
Yeah,
in a complex environment, where things are changing all the time. It's good to have a plan. Like you can have like
yeah,
a project plan, and this is what we want. This is what we want to happen. But the reality is, you have to be able to pivot quickly and change
yeah,
as different things happen. Because it's always about, well, if you're clear about overall this is where we're trying to get to, it's like there are different things that are going on all the time, and
yeah.
you're trying to move them all the time to get them to so that everything's aligned.
You taught me there's like a nuance. We've all done leadership courses and we all read leadership books, and it's not like if you do A, then you do B, then you get C, then you get D. Like it's true, but it's not easy. There's tiny little things to do, and you're just constantly learning, you're just constantly flexing. So, the best piece of advice you gave to me was to make it easy for people to work with you, Tara. And I think you said it was on the lines of this, and this was before COVID. But if it's the choice between an email and a phone call, phone them. And if it's a choice between an online meeting or an in-person meeting, try to get the in-person meeting. My question to you is, the world has changed. Um, how do you build relationships with people? Like if you think about the ICB, a lot of people are leaving. So if it's all about relationships, how do you build relationships when it's not easy to meet with people? Like if I sometimes want to contact the ICB, I've got to send an email to like a generic inbox. So how do you build relationships when people are losing their jobs? It's really stressful. ICBs have merged, so those people that you need don't have as much time as they had before.
Yeah. So I think it's a great question, and it's difficult. And the world, you're right, the world has changed, and it is difficult to get face to face. But I don't think those principles of building relationships is easier if you're face to face with someone, and it's easier if you can see them versus if you're just on the phone. And certainly building a relationship by email, that never happens, right? So if you've got those things are still true. And so I think there's something about prioritizing who you build relationships with. If you know there's a lot of flux, and if people are going to keep changing, then in an ICB, then they might not be the people to spend a lot of time building a relationship at this point. Instead, I do think though there is an importance around, I know we're going to talk about neighbourhoods, but around how do you build relationships with the other leaders in your neighbourhood area? And I still think they're by definition local, and I think there is something you can start that by face to face in some instances. And also I think one of the things that I've noticed has happened with PCNs when they think about neighbourhoods is a lot of those relationships feel quite bilateral, right? So it's like I have a relationship with the person from the voluntary sector, I have this relationship with the person from the community trust, and they're two totally separate things, right? They don't interact with each other. That's partly because the way things have developed has been around specific projects, and so we have a project and we need this relationship, so we work on this relationship, and then that happens for that project. But I think there's a value in face to face, and I definitely think we can talk about it more if you want to, but I think there's a value in bringing those relationships together and trying to establish that group. because
Yeah.
there's a group dynamic. I think there's a value in the group dynamic, and there's definitely value in PCNs seeking to take by being the convener of some of those relationships, they can also become the default leader, which I think will be important in the future, even if it doesn't feel that important now.
Okay. Oh, I've got a contract in the Isle of Wight and I go there once a month.
Okay.
And I really enjoy it. And I think that's like one of the beauties of my business. I think one of the reasons why I've been in business for such a long time is my willingness to travel.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think if I didn't, I wouldn't have a business. I'd run out of clients in Kent and Medway. So yeah, I do think it's important. And I would also add, I think the group bit is really important and not to hinge all your relationship on a couple of people.
Hmm.
Because if when those leave, then that's your anchor gone and you've got to start again. So we have to be very smart and very, very strategic, but also sometimes relationships just come, like organically and naturally. You might be sitting next to somebody. So you can't, if you try to force it too much, it
Yeah,
doesn't quite work, but
no.
it does pay to be intentional.
I do think there's something about finding the right individual to have a relationship with. People say to me, "Well, I know we can't build a relationship with the community trust; they won't deal with us." Right? The community trust, if you think about it, that's like lots of people. That's
Yeah,
hundreds,
yeah,
potentially
yeah.
thousands of people,
Yeah.
right? What do you mean? Like, does that mean you're telling me every single person in the community trust you can't have a relationship with, or is it the people that you've come across so far? So there is something about finding out who are the people who are there, particularly the more senior people, people who can unblock blocks that you can build a relationship with. And you go, well, I don't know who that is. But if you ask people who've been in your system a while, particularly people, the ICB or people that you know back from, when it was CCG days, and say, who is sensible, who is reasonable, who is a person who you can get on with at Community Trust. People will know, and then you go, can you go and see that person, build a relationship with that person, and then can you kind of take it from there, and then just because I remember, I was a director in a acute trust like a long time ago, and I remember I was on an executive team and I had a completely different viewpoint to, our director of operations or the director of finance. And so I actually needed the support from people working with me outside to help me in
Yeah.
those discussions. It's not as simple as the community trust bad or won't
Yeah.
do things. It's like, how do we have a relationship with them and how do we influence? How do we find the right people to influence and how do we build it from?
What does somebody need to email you for them to respond with, yeah, let's meet?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I think there is something though about being clear about what you're bringing. So
Yeah.
it's almost like put yourself in their shoes and
Yeah.
think about why is there value in them meeting me rather than saying, I'm the PCN, so you have to. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I'm the PCN manager, I'm the PCN clinical director, and I work with. Don't assume they know what that means. So that I work with these 7 practices. We're really keen to make changes. We've already done this and this with these people in your organisation. I think we could do more, but I'd really love to meet you to explore what those things are. Just something to
Yeah.
try and sell. Don't think they just, if they say no, or you have to explain yourself, somehow that's an affront. They're busy people and they do have to
Yeah, that's a good
prioritise their
point.
time.
I think the ask is really important. You get like vague messages. So then you put the ball in their court and they are, how many emails do you get? And you think,
Yeah,
what would you want from me?
yeah, exactly.
So I
Yeah.
think it is be as clear as you can and yeah, put yourself in their shoes.
Equally on that, I think sometimes if you don't ask for too much, equally,
Yeah.
I think leave it open. Like, can we explore how we might work together, rather than saying, I need you to sort out, Johnny in your local team because he's not doing his job. That is unlikely to get the same kind of
Yeah.
response.
And do you think that let's explore, is it good to have an idea or is it genuine? I want to meet with you. Not quite sure how we can work together, but there would be value in meeting together. Do you think it's best to go with really open, let's explore? Personally, that doesn't work with me.
No,
Kind of,
I think you
give
need to
me,
tie
I need something.
you need to tie it to something.
Yeah.
I know that doing what we can to reduce demand into your outpatients or demand into your A&E is important. We've got some ideas how we could do that. I really like to talk them through with you, and so we could work out what we can do to get maybe what we could do together going forward. But tie it to something that's on
Okay.
their agenda.
Okay. At the time of recording, the GP contract letter came out this week. What were your initial reactions?
So I was really, I mean, I guess not surprised, but still disappointed. And I think it kind of goes back to the decision that NHS England made to no longer negotiate with general practice in the production of that contract, and instead to say, we are going to decide what we want, and then we'll consult with some stakeholders, and then we're just going to impose it on the service. And that's the way it's going to be. And the problem with that is, because that's kind of how the NHS works with like hospitals and community trusts and other parts of the service, where every year they produce this thing called planning guidance. They send it out. The service has to write these plans about how they're going to do it, even if it doesn't feel very realistic. And then they get signed off, and there's this whole process that goes on. But the thing that NHS England don't seem to understand is that GPs are independent contractors, and so they have to be able to sustain those businesses. So if they put out unreasonable requests and demands that aren't funded properly, then those contractors aren't going to be able to continue as contractors. And these people have got houses. You know, if you're a GP partner, your house is on the line. You've got unlimited liability with that contract. So to not even negotiate with the people representing the contractors is no way of doing business. And the thing that really stood out to me, people talk about, oh, well, there's 485 million put into the contract, but, you know, that was half of what was in last year. And people haven't felt that has been a great uplift. So it's not a great deal financially. But the big thing for me was the removal of advice and guidance as an enhanced service to just, oh, no, you've got to do it now. It's part of core. So it's always been a principle with the GP contract that if you're going to introduce something new, then if you do it as an enhanced service, there's a kind of onus on NHS England or, you know, the government to say, we've got to package this in a way that makes it worth the while of practices to do it. If we don't put enough funding into it, no one's going to do it. And so, you know, £20 for an item of service, there's a lot of work involved in doing advice and guidance. So I know most practices signed up, so that's how they had the option of doing those referrals. But the number of referrals done is, I'm sure, we haven't seen the figures, but I'm sure they vary significantly. So instead of saying we need to get that enhanced service better funded or better arranged so that it can work for independent contractors, instead of doing that, what they've done is just said, no, we're putting it in the contract, so you have to do it. And so even if you don't think it's enough money, it's tough, right? You've got to do it. So there's a massive imposition that has come on that hasn't been properly funded. And so it's not just that, it's that principle. I don't think we'll see another enhanced service, because why would they bother doing it as enhanced service? They can just put it in the core contract and say, oh, we've included it in the core uplift.
Do you think that there'll be local enhanced services, though, that could support that advice and guidance?
I'm not sure in the current financial climate that we're in that an ICB would be able to explain to NHS England why it's offered an advice and guidance enhanced service when there's already one in the national contract. Well, I mean, there isn't one, but okay. You know, I just think they would find that difficult in this financial regime.
Okay, so it's not advice and guidance, but on a similar lines. So in the GP contract, and I must admit, I focus on the PCN bit and not GMS contract. But in the letter, it said, moving forward, patients that are deemed, you know, like clinically urgent have to be seen on the same day and not told to be called back. Now, in some areas, they might have, or they do have, a local GP resilience scheme. And part of that, so I'm working with one where part of that is same day, part of that is home visiting, and part of that is proactive care. But that same day, they get, you know, additional money for. So it has to be seen on the same. It has to be seen on the same day. But also in the GP contract, there is this also same day they can't call back. So you do have. In the local contract, they're not clinically urgent. They just have to be seen on the same day, regardless if I phone up with a cough. I've got to be seen on the same day. So there is in some areas, there is a local and a national contract. Are they being funded to do the same thing, or are they in conflict with each other? Does that make sense?
Well, there are two different things. So one is, I always think it's interesting where local systems have funded something that then isn't funded in the national, because that just shows that what's available nationally isn't enough to actually fund the work that's required to make those things happen. And that's what the GPC will say, and I think that is true, right? So I do think there's an underfunding of the work required in the national contract. I'm not sure about, I mean, the specific example, it will depend, because what the contract change says is if it's not urgent, then it doesn't need to be seen that day. It just needs a plan by the end of the next working day.
In that contract, it doesn't. But in the local contract, those patients have to be seen on the same day.
So because there's that difference, then I would expect that you would be able to carry on with that local contract.
Really?
I would think so, because there's a big difference between seeing everyone on the same day and just those that are determined as clinically urgent on the same day.
So then the question is there room for local negotiation in this current climate? Because that is a real example. And that contract was 3 years. So that contract started last year. So do you think there's room for an area to say, well, look, this is the direction from the local national contract. We've got this contract. Could we do X, Y, and Z with the money that still supports access or not? Is that 3-year contract? Is there room for negotiation, Ben?
I mean, there is, but it will depend on the ICB, because with some ICBs there won't be, and some ICBs there will. And that's been a source of huge frustration for PCNs, is they'll talk to PCNs in another area and they'll get an enhanced service like you're talking about. They'll be able to negotiate with them. They'll be sympathetic to general practice. They'll understand the challenges that PCNs have, and they'll be trying to support them to make things happen. And another area, they're just not interested. There's no enhanced service. You've got the national contract. You've just got to get on and do this. And our focus is on, making sure that you adhere to the standards in the national contract. So I think that isn't helpful. It depends on your ICB. That said, when we think about neighbourhoods, there is an enthusiasm both nationally and locally for things that will make a difference that neighbourhoods can do. So I think what we haven't seen a lot of is where either federations or groups of PCNs or even individual PCNs are coming up with ideas with their local neighbourhood partners of things that can make a difference. If the business case is strong enough, then the willingness, I think, is there for people to support those things. So I think one of the issues that we've had that I see is when we talk about care closer to home, in general practice, we think about delivering the same care in a cheaper setting with less overheads. And so it's a kind of marginal cost gain. It's not really a big saving, and general practice never feel why hospitals getting paid more for doing the exact same work that we're now doing here. And I think the thinking at the centre is not that, right? It's different to that. It's saying what we want is like a totally redesigned model. So instead of people going and having all these outpatients is an example that they use a lot, but instead of having all these outpatient attendances, is there a different way of doing things where the majority of activity, of follow-up activity, it doesn't need to be outpatient attendances, but whatever that is, that can happen outside of hospital with just support from the experts. And so tell us what that model needs to be, rather than us nationally saying this is the new model and then you have to do it. So I think it's that thinking that I think the centre is thinking about, how do we try and encourage that? And I think if PCNs and neighbourhoods can start to get into that space, that kind of creative redesign space, rather than have we got the right contract vehicle or those sort of more practical things that aren't really changing stuff, then I think that's where there's more opportunity to be had.
Do you think the GP contract letter signals the beginning of the end of PCNs?
Well, I don't think it's a great letter for PCNs, is it? Because there are a couple of things that really stand out. The capacity and access payment going to practices, that's going to be tough. The problem for that is those PCNs that are more forward-thinking, that have used that more creatively, are the ones that are going to suffer most. The ones that were just giving it to the practices anyway, It's like, fine, right? So that sounds tough. And then there's this clear kind of signal that there's a primacy of neighbourhoods over PCNs. So that whole thing about there needs to be greater alignment between PCNs and neighbourhoods, but, as in PCNs need to match neighbourhoods, not the other way around. It very much feels like the future is neighbourhoods, and so PCNs working with the neighbourhoods, rather than the future is PCN. So I don't think it means the end of PCNs, because I I don't think nationally they want to go to individual practices working in neighbourhoods, but I think there is PCNs as part of neighbourhoods. Feels like the future.
Aren't PCNs the neighbourhood?
Well, the big difference, as I would see it, between a PCN and a neighbourhood is PCNs represent the GP practices working in a neighbourhood area. But in that area, you also have the community trust working, social care working, voluntary sector working, a whole range of different health and care providers. And so I understand it. The ambition of the neighbourhood is to say, how can those health and care providers work collectively and organise care around the needs of patients rather than the needs of those individual organisations? So if you're thinking about it like that, then the PCN and GP practice are only one part of what makes up the neighbourhood. And so it's a really important distinction because instead of, even though the geographical area is the same, the scope of what's included is a lot bigger.
In that instance, who would hold the single neighbourhood provider contract? Single.
Anyone could hold it who works in that neighbourhood. The most obvious people to hold it are the GPs through the PCN, because if you think about it, the community trust also work in a lot of other areas. Social care also work in a lot of other areas. Acute trust also work in a lot of other areas. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what will happen. If that PCN's not in a position to hold that contract, you may end up in scenarios. And you can see, community trust and acute trust in particular, and social care organisations thinking, well, we could maybe host the contract, but then we would need to think about how it would work from there. That's why I think there is importance for GPs and PCNs to establish themselves as the leaders of the neighbourhood. And so we talk quite a bit about the value of convening neighbourhood meetings. See, we talk about relationships, importance of getting things done. So one of the things that I see happening quite a lot is place-based ICB boards will say, okay, these are going to be the integrated neighbourhood teams that we're going to have. So these INTs, and they're going to work on frailty or women's health or whatever they're going to work on. And then your job as a neighbourhood is just to implement the INTs that we've already decided are going to happen. That isn't actually the spirit of the 10-year plan. 10-year plan is to say, in your neighbourhood, what are the specific local needs? Where are the greatest health inequalities? What are the problems that you've got? And what priorities do you identify? And then what integrated neighbourhood teams potentially do you think need putting in place? But currently there is no neighbourhood, right? So there is no one who has that voice. So the whole thing's being set up as top down. So if you convene the neighbourhoods to come together, if you, the PCN, could get together with just the leaders of, the people who are working in your patch and say, you know what, the big problem for us is this, it's, I don't know, patients over 65 with frailty, whatever it is, that's what we need to be focusing on, and push back and start saying these are the things that we need. Not only will that be better for your patients, but it also starts to establish you as a voice with a say in what goes on, and not setting yourself up just to be the recipient of things that are going to happen in the future.
You say there are no neighbourhoods yet, but there are. There are neighbourhoods or areas across the country. You've got the national neighbourhood improvement program. So there are.
But how many PCNs do you go to and you say, okay, do you meet as a neighbourhood? Do you meet with the providers of the leaders of the local area do you have a neighbourhood meeting? Does that, I've seen one, I think, across, 15 that I work with at the moment. It's rare. It feels to me rare. What's your experience?
They do. I have come across lots of networks, lots of areas that call themselves a neighbourhood that have those integrated meetings. Yes, they do in the Isle of Wight. Well, you'd like to think so, because there is it 42, 43 national pilots, and lots of people that didn't make the pilot have organised themselves like that. So I do see and believe that there are lots of areas doing what you're suggesting, or already doing what you're suggesting.
I've seen it where, so more common is where it's like, okay, we've got a project on X, and so we've got a team working together on this project. It feels very project-based at the minute. There's not a sense of coming together to say, what should our priority be for this neighbourhood? That's less common. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, because it does happen, right? But it's definitely less common. And I've talked to lots of PCNs where it's way outside their experience of what's going on. For lots of people, it's like people are talking about neighbourhoods, and we just don't really get it, right? Because it's just like an unfunded bit of extra work that doesn't make any sense. And that's quite a common experience of PCNs currently about what neighbourhoods are.
So one of the questions, and I know we've just done it, is at what point do we stop, like commentating on what isn't there and what could happen and just start doing? And I find myself doing it all the time, and you just have to come to a point. My therapist said to me, Tara, like the what ifs in life, will lead you down a dark tunnel that you may never emerge from. So there comes a point in just going, we've got the information that we've got, and we just have to make a calculated risk. We're either going to do nothing and wait, and there's a risk in that, or we're going to try to do what we can with what we've got, and there is a risk in that, and we're just going to move forward versus just stopping to, stir the pot of vague information. It's such a waste of time.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the challenges of leadership, isn't it? It's like, I talk about tennis, right? So one of the things I get told all the time is, making a bad decision is better than making no decision. So like sometimes it's you just decide, are we going to just ignore it for now and carry on, or are we going to really go for it, or are we going to set ourselves up as a leader? And one of the best ways to kind of work out what to do is to hear about what other people are doing and to work it through with other people. We've got this PCN Plus conference coming up in Nottingham in April. That's a great place where you can find out what people from across the country are doing, how they've taken some of these ideas, how they have met as neighbourhoods, like you say, how they have brought together across a whole area, like federations working across all the PCNs, then working with the partners. There's some fantastic examples of what people have done. And so I do think, okay, find out what they're doing, what bits of that could we do, what bit do we need to do differently, and work out your own plan. In that kind of environment, I think is perfect for that.
Yeah, we are taking so much time. We're meeting all of the speakers, and my feedback to the speakers is to be as honest as you professionally can. This is not a conference for you to sit on the stage and go like, aren't we amazing? And this is what we've done. Because it's a bit like with these podcasts, like you have a podcast interview somebody, then afterwards they go, and then this happened and that happened. It's a nightmare. And it's more like, this is where we are, this is where we've got to, versus this is how we've done it and this is the blueprint. So definitely that is on the 22nd of April in Nottingham. We've got in-person tickets and online access as well, so for those of you that can't make it in person. Ben, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
I'll speak to you soon, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.